Yo, what's up guys? Welcome to another Magic the Gathering video. Today we're gonna look at another EDH. This time we're going blue and white, the Azorius colors. And this deck is gonna be a Brago deck. So, what is Brago? Brago is a legendary flying spirit. He's a 2/4. And his special thing is, whenever Brago King Eternal deals combat damage to a player, exile any number of target non-land permanents you control. Then return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control. So this enables us obviously to play a lot of permanents with come into play or enters the battlefield effects. And trigger these over and over again to get massive benefits and basically lock down the field. There's also going to be some control spells to help us get a lockdown onto our opponents to get into dominant position. So yeah, let's first look at the creatures we're fielding with this one. Next to Brago, you have the Adarkar Valkyrie. Basically, she guarantees me as long as she is out, I can basically save any creature from getting killed by spells. Also, I can save creatures from mass removal and stuff. It's only one, but it might be a key creature that I can save, so that's an important card. Then the Angel of Serenity. It allows me to exile 3 other target creature cards from the battlefield or from the graveyard whenever she enters the battlefield, and if she leaves the battlefield, the exile cards go back to your hand. So she has like 2 ways we can play her. Either we can exile creatures from the battlefield that are a pain to us, and then when something better comes into play, we can flip her with Brago back to hand, or better into exile and back to the battlefield again. And basically this means we'll bounce their creatures from exile to their hand, and we get another 3 creatures we can get into exile. The other thing you can do with her is, of course, you can exile things from graveyards, even your own, and then bounce her, get it back into play, and then basically you get these exiled cards back into your hand. So she's also like a graveyard card, so to speak. She interacts with your graveyard and the opponent's graveyard as well. The Archangel of Thieves. As long as she's untapped, attacking you or a planeswalker you control costs 1 for each creature that wants to attack these targets. And if she's attacking, the defender has to pay 1 for each creature that wants to block. So she's a very control heavy card. No enter the battlefield there. The Banisher Priest is a simple exile effect slapped onto a creature. As long as this creature is in play, that the exiled creature stays in exile. So you can change target when something more lucrative comes into play. Just get Brago attacking and switch targets. So that's nice. Clever Impersonator, it's a clone that chooses its target while it's entering the battlefield, so it's perfect for this bounce deck. The Deadeye Navigator, I think this is one of the core cards of pretty much every Brago deck, because it allows me to get a flicker effect onto the Deadeye Navigator and one other creature. So I can flicker creatures without Brago, so that's a very good option if the opponent has a very locked down board and you can't get in for damage. The Deputy of Acquittals is a flash bouncer, so I just thought it would be a very nice creature. Just, you know, bounce enemy creatures, and you can play it flash from your hand, which is also quite nice. Ephara, God of Polish, is a card draw engine, basically, because every beginning of each turn, if we had another creature than this one enter the battlefield under our control last turn, we draw a card. So yeah, we basically, with this, we almost every turn will draw an additional card. Grand Abolisher, this goes into the more control heavy part of the deck, so this prevents my opponents from casting spells and activating abilities during my turn, which is nice. Iona, Shield of Samaria, she fits into the flicker and the control category because basically she, whenever you flicker her, you can choose a new color, and when she comes into play, of course, spells of the chosen color cannot be cast by your opponents. So whoever is the biggest threat, you just choose one of their colors and prevent them from playing. Lavinia of the 10th, she is pretty fantastic, I feel, because she detains stuff. Whenever she enters the battlefield, she detains every permanent an opponent controls with converted mana cost 4 or less. Well, non-land permanent, obviously, but still, this can tap down whole boards if she comes into play, and she can do it over and over again, which is beautiful. Levana the Preserver, life gain angel, and also an angel producing angel, which is pretty nice. The Illuminate Primordial, yeah, it's kinda beneficial as well for your opponent, since they gain life for the creature you exile, but still, in a pinch this can be a game changer. Then there's a classic, the Mana War. I absolutely love this card. It's just a bouncer basically, but it's a beautiful card. Phantasmal Image, it's the same as the Clever Impersonator. It's a clone basically that chooses whatever it clones when it enters the battlefield. But it has this downside to it, that whenever this creature becomes a target of a spell or an ability, it gets sacrificed. But yeah, the Quicksilver Gargantua as well is kind of a clone, but it's not only cloning a creature, it's making that cloned creature a 7/7. So you can get quite ridiculous stuff with that. The Reflector Mage, I think that's a very classical card in white and blue. It's been a staple, I think, for a long time actually in Modern, I think. That's been a while, actually. So if he enters the battlefield, you bounce a creature, and then the opponent cannot play this creature next turn. So you can delay opponents for days, and when he plays it again, then you just bounce or flicker the Reflector Mage again. So that's a great card to lock down enemy creatures. Seagate Oracle for library control. Stonehold Dignitary? Yes, that's how you pronounce it, I think. Basically gives you the ability to strip opponents of their combat phases. And if you can flicker them every turn, you can always prevent the strongest player from having a combat phase, which is nice. Stunt Double, again a clone with Enter the Battlefield that has Flash as an upside. Pretty neat. The Subjugator Angel is, well, it's a finisher basically. Whenever she enters the battlefield, tap all creatures your opponents control. So you can keep a field on lockdown every turn with this guy. Sun Titan gets you back creatures or permanents with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard whenever he attacks or enters the battlefield. So there's a lot of targets actually in this deck. If we go up here, we see 18 cards with 3 converted mana costs, 11 with 2, 6 with 1. So there's a lot of targets for that Sun Titan. The Wall of Omens, that's a card draw engine, obviously a very, very good card in this deck. And the War Priest of Toon to destroy enchantments over and over again, should they be a problem to you. Now, instants. There's some very key instants in here. Here we have Acrobatic Maneuver. It's basically a flicker for one creature and then you draw a card. So this is from, I think, Kaladesh, from that block. So that's a bit of a newer one, which is nice. There's Brainstorm for more library advantage. Cloud Shift, that's a pretty neat card. It's exactly the same as Acrobatic Maneuver, but you don't draw a card. Then the Aerial Interlude, this is a card that can fabricate massive blowouts. Basically you exile any number of target creatures you control and return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Meaning, this thing actually dodges Wrath of Gods and effects like that. Because a flicker does not. If you flicker something in reaction to a mass removal, it will actually complete the flicker before the mass removal comes off the stack, so it has no effect. But the Aerial Interlude actually does, so that's a great card. The Ghostly Flicker, it's exactly what it says. It exiles 2 target artifacts, creatures and or lands you control, and then you return them under your control to the battlefield. Then we have, again, Momentary Blink, same thing, but with Flashback this time. We also have one path to exile, just to get rid of annoying creature permanently. The Render Silent, it's a counter spell and it prevents a combo player from, for example, going off this turn. It's pretty nice actually. Also, Swords to Plowshares, I think a pretty strong card in this deck, because there always will be this one creature that you definitely need to get rid of completely. Maybe something that has crazy comes into battlefield effect, so bouncing it every turn is not an option. So this is exactly what you need to do. We have only 3 sorceries here. We have the Clone Legion, which gives you, for each creature target player controls, a token of that creature, and it enters the battlefield under your control, so get somebody else's board, or a copy of it, which is nice. Planar Cleansing, to destroy everything if it needs to be. Also, Supreme Verdict, to destroy all creatures, and counterable is a bonus on top. Then we go to the artifacts. We have the Altar of the Brood. Whenever a permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent puts the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. At first sight, that doesn't sound that exciting, and it might actually enable graveyard play for some EDHs. But with the amount of flickering you're going to do if you're actually going to get ahead, you're gonna thin out their library so quickly. It's amazing. Then the Azorius Cluestone, Keyrune and Signet, which is like a basic, I think. The Conjurer's Closet. At the beginning of your end step, you may exile target creature you control, return that card to the battlefield under your control. So at the end of every one of your turn, you flicker something. It's pretty nice actually. The Field Mist Border Post for mana. Gravedigger's Cage, that's actually kind of a failsafe if somebody really enjoys playing stuff from their graveyard. Yeah, this puts a stop to it, which is kind of nice. The Ichor Wellspring, another bouncy artifact here that draws you cards. Lightning Reavers to protect Brago. The Panharmonicon, which is again from Kaladesh, so it's one of the newer cards, and it quickly has become, I think, one of the favorites for the Brago deck, because it allows you to basically double your trigger abilities from entering the battlefield effects, which is pretty insane. So every time a creature comes into play under your control and it triggers a enter the battlefield effect, it triggers that effect an additional time, which is kind of insane. Spine of Isha, at first sight this looks absolutely worthless. I mean, it's a 7 cost artifact that says whenever it enters the battlefield it destroys target permanent, and if it goes into the graveyard you return it to your hand. So is it worth it to pay 7 to destroy a permanent? No. Is it worth it to pay nothing to flicker this thing every turn and destroy another permanent? Oh yes it is. So if this thing lands on the battlefield and Brago is still there, good luck. This Trionic Resonator, it is a nice artifact. It has the ability to pay 2 and tap to copy target triggered ability you control. So again, we are able to double or enter the battlefield effect for one or creature. So if you have something really important you want to do, you want to draw more cards, you want to bounce more things, this is the artifact that does do the job. The Whisper Skill Cloak, another safety precaution for Brago, because he is going to be pretty much one of our main targets. Our strategy is pretty much hinging on him, so he needs to be protected. Now, enchantments, we have 14 enchantments, that's quite a lot, and there's a lot of interesting stuff here. The Aura of Silence, as long as it's in play, enemies pay 2 more for artifact and enchantment spells, which slows them down considerably if they want to go with either very badass enchantments or if they have a lot of mana artifacts. And you can sacrifice the Aura of Silence to destroy an artifact or enchantment. The Cage of Hands, which is actually a bit redundant if you think about it, because it's a pacifism that for 1 and a white you can return to your own hand. But of course with Brago you can also flicker this thing, so it's nice. The Curse of Exhaustion. I put this in this deck because I wanted to be able to also do stuff without Brago. So if I want to establish control before I put Brago on the field, for example. And this is one of the things. You put this on a player and that player cannot cast more than one spell each turn. Especially funny if you know you have one combo player on your table. If there's like this red-blue spell stack that wants to go off at like turn 7 or so, I don't know, just put that on him and he will hate you for the rest of the game. The Exclusionary Tool, this is kind of a weird card because there's an imprint ability and then the bottom text, which is basically irrelevant. So imprint, when Exclusionary Tool enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent. So that's basically what it is. It is an exile permanent. The bottom text says players can't cast spells with the same name as the exiled card. That almost never happens. If you manage to actually exile like a Soul Ring and everybody else has not played their Soul Ring yet, yeah, okay, but it will almost never happen in a game of EDH. So, yeah. Followed Footsteps, I really like this thing because it basically runs on its own. As soon as you put it into play, it's gonna just give you value every turn. It's a bit counterproductive because, of course, at the beginning of your upkeep you get a token of the enchanted creature, but this means you cannot flicker that creature, because if you do, well, obviously the enchantment is gonna die. What you can do, I think, is flicker the enchantment and the creature and then put them back, creature first and then the enchantment on top of the creature. I think that should work. Not quite sure though, so don't take my word for it. I'm not quite sure if that works, but yeah, you just have to be smart about this one. Ghostly Prison, so everybody who wants to attack us has to pay 2 for each creature he or she wants to attack us with. It's nice, you know, a bit of pillow forting, just to prevent people from attacking us. Grasp of Fate. When Grasp of Fate enters the battlefield, for each opponent exile up to 1 target non-land permanent until Grasp of Fate leaves the battlefield. So again, if something more urgent comes up, just flicker Grasp of Fate and choose new targets. It's pretty simple. Leyline of Sanctity, that again is to secure basically yourself. It goes into the same line as Ghostly Prison and stuff. It basically gives you hexproof, and if you happen to have this on your opening hand, it's the better. Martial Law, at the beginning of your upkeep, detain target creature opponent controls. I kinda like this. I don't know why. I know it's not the most effective enchantment because 1, you pay for it and then it only affects the opponent next turn, and 2, it might not be that good in multiplayer games because it's only 1 creature. Still, I kinda like this because you just put it into play and you just see it work. And in longer games this can actually be very nice. If the opponent only has 1 big creature, it's never gonna attack. The Oblivion Ring, of course, just exile stuff and then flicker it, exile something else. Of course, if you flicker it, the other thing will come back into play, but it's nice to have, you know, the option. Something you cannot flicker, well, you can, but you shouldn't, is the Quarantine Field. Because, of course, the Quarantine Field is cool because you can exile X things, because you pay XX as a casting cost. But if you flicker this thing and it comes back, it treats the X as a 0, which means it will exile 0 creatures, or rather 0 non-land permanents. So don't flicker this. It's not worth it. Skybind. Whenever it or another enchantment enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent. Return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So you just get stuff, you get rid of stuff for the turn, so to speak. But you can also do it with your own stuff, just as a hint here. It's not an instant flicker, but it has its uses in certain situations. The Sphere of Safety. Creatures can't attack you or a planeswalker you control unless their controller pays X for each of those creatures, where X is the number of enchantments you control. Yeah, with 14 enchantments this can get quite ridiculous if you get them out. Then also Steal of the Godhead is again something to protect Brago with. It's enchant creature. As long as enchanted creature is white, it gets +1/+1 and lifelink, and as long as it is blue, it gets +1/+1 and is unblockable. So if you slap this on Brago, you can get through every turn no matter what. That's the beauty of it. You can trigger your stuff without being afraid of blockers. Then we got 2 planeswalkers, Chase, the Unraveler of Secrets, because I like to scry and draw cards. Also, it has a bounce effect on -2 and on -8, should you ever get there. Then you get an emblem which says the first spell of each opponent that he casts in each turn is countered, basically. So yeah, should you ever get there, you're gonna probably win the game. Venser the Sojourner is basically exactly what your deck needs. For +2 you can exile a permanent you own, return it to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. Again, not an instant flicker, still very useful. Also with -1 you can make things unblockable, so yeah, Brago says hi. And should you ever get there, -8, you get an emblem whenever you cast a spell, exile target permanent. So then it gets ridiculous. Although I just have to think about it. Be careful, because you have to exile something. If there's nothing on the battlefield, then your stuff, you should be careful. We got a lot of lands, obviously. There's not much special things in these lands. I mean, there's the Celestial Colonnade to get maybe an additional blocker out. Other than that, I don't think there's much interesting stuff here in the lands. There is a Shrine to Nyxos. But else, well, a Rogue's Passage, again, to get Brago unblockable, so you can trigger your stuff. But other than that, it's pretty standard. A lot of double lands, a lot of fetchy lands. So yeah, I think that's the basic structure of the deck. I think I gave you a good overview. And let me shortly talk about on the topic of what is this deck good against and what are its flaws. I think it's very good against in slower games where people are allowed to build up. As soon as you get Brago and a few creatures out, I think you're gonna dominate slower games. Because if the opponents need to build up their board, need time to get their big stuff out, it's gonna be very hard with Brago out on the field that causes bounce effects every few turns. That's almost impossible, you know? So in these slower kind of games, where opponents really need to build up, it's gonna be your game. What Brago is not so strong against, I think, is a lot of spell-based decks, I would say. I mean, yes, I got a few cards that interact very well with spell decks, but they're only a far and a few between. So against a blue-red spell deck that just goes off, you don't have lots of answers against that, because you cannot really stop it. There's not that much counter spells in this deck to actually handle something like that. So yeah, also maybe token decks that produce a ton of tokens every turn, you might get overrun. And I guess that's basically your biggest fear, right? Getting overrun and not being able to keep up with the opponents, not being able to attack your opponent to trigger your flicker effects. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you need to really be careful. Also, of course, Brago is the axis on which this deck rests upon. There's a few other effects that can cause flicker, but they're either spells, which means they're one-way options most of the time, or they're planeswalkers, which are even more vulnerable when they're out on the field. So if you decide to put Brago on the field, be ready to protect him, or at least be sure that he cannot be killed right now. You need to get the effect from him, you need to be in a position where you can play him and wait a turn and then actually get into combat. If you don't, and just play him and then he gets just sniped by a cheap kill spell or something like that, yeah, you're gonna be far behind. So this is really a deck where you need to know where and when do I play my general, I think. So yeah, I've played this deck so far, well, I only play tested it, so to speak, so I haven't really had the opportunity to gather a lot of experience with it, but in my opinion it's a very fun deck. The bouncing is pretty interesting. Also, if you're a newer player and you have trouble with like sequencing your stuff correctly, this is a perfect deck to actually get you to practice that. Because sometimes it's very important in which order your stuff returns to the battlefield and stuff like that. And which stuff do I bounce, which stuff do I not bounce. You can bounce your own creatures with the creatures that come into the battlefield and trigger additional stuff with that. It can get really complicated, and I think that's great. Alright, so this has been another Magic the Gathering themed episode. Next time I guess we're gonna look at the next deck on the list, which would be a white-black deck, so Orzhov. Until then, I wish you all the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care.